Hello and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I'm Alicia Seckham. Well, after celebrating 46 years of independence from the United Kingdom, the Republic of Botswana has had 4 decades of uninterrupted civilian leadership, progressive social policies and significant capital investment. This has led to the creation of one of the most dynamic economies in Africa, but the country also has one of the world's highest known rates of HIV/AIDS infection and other socio-economic challenges as well. This week we take a closer look at the opportunities and challenges that this Southern African country presents.
Spanning over 580,000 square kilometers and bordered by South Africa, Namibia and Zimbabwe, the Southern African landlocked country of Botswana is home to around 2 million people. Tourism, financial services and agriculture make up Botswana's economic sectors. However, diamond mining has been a key revenue generator and currently accounts for 1/3 of GDP, almost 80% of export earnings and about half of government's revenue. Copper, nickel and soda ash are other export commodities to countries like Zimbabwe, South Africa and Europe. Import partners include France, South Africa and Sweden, from which it sources food products, machinery and textiles. Botswana's heavy reliance on a single luxury export was a critical factor in the sharp economic contraction of 2009, reflected in the negative GDP growth of 4.9%. However, the economy rebounded strongly, aided by improved global demands for diamond. The economy grew by 7.2% in 2010 and was slightly weaker at 6.4% in 2011. Botswana's economy is predicted to slow to 4.8% and 6.7% in 2012 and 2013 respectively, in line with global trends. Botswana is still faced with high levels of poverty, inequality and unemployment, as well as high HIV/AIDS prevalence rates. Although there has been a decline in the proportion of the population living below the poverty line to 20% from 30%, the poverty level is still considered high for a middle-income country. Botswana is addressing these challenges through a number of poverty reduction initiatives, which involves implementing job creation programs. The country is also making significant progress with its targeted Millennium Development Goals, especially regarding education and gender empowerment. Dumisho Maganyele, Johannesburg.
Now joining me in studio to take a closer look at Botswana as a business and investment destination is Terence Dumbe, Managing Partner at Minchin & Kelly, Johan Mering, CEO of Blue Financial Services, and joining us from our bureau in Cape Town this afternoon as well, Craig Featherby, Regional Manager for Africa at Deveria. Thanks to you all for joining us today. And perhaps, Terence, let's kick off conversation with you because your company provides legal services within Botswana's borders, and while you cater to Botswana's citizens, foreign investors form very much a part of your clientele as well. So from your liaisons with them, what's sentiment like when it comes to Botswana as an investment destination right now?
I think generally the sentiment is quite positive. A lot of positive information is available in terms of where Botswana stands from various angles, in terms of rule of law, in terms of governance, in terms of stability. So I think the outlook generally is quite positive when people look at Botswana. In your insert you talked about certain, there's obviously with every positive there are some negatives, but generally the outlook is quite positive.
Well, let's hear from an investor. Craig, you're one such foreign investor. What was the appeal of setting up shop in Botswana?
Originally, when we looked at Africa, we looked for long-term sustainability in creating a long-term sustainable business. And we initially set up our operations in South Africa. And then when our marketing team started researching Africa, the obvious choice was Botswana. At that stage in 2009, according to the World Bank, Botswana was the fastest growing economy since 1965. And therefore, the obvious decision was to initially start our Southern Africa expansion from Botswana.
Mm-hmm. Well, Johan, you also invested very much in this country. Blue Financial Services, a microfinance institution servicing the formerly employed but underbanked and underserved employees. The investment case that Botswana put on the table for you, because from what we're hearing right now, it seems to be its stability, corporate governance, more so than anything else, that stands out.
Yeah, I think Botswana is also, as we heard in the insert, has gone through a process or rather good GDP growth, and it's also anticipated for that to continue. And as we heard in the insert, if you have periods of good GDP growth, there's also a widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots automatically happens, because some obviously participate and grow as the GDP grows, and others are left behind. So from that perspective, Botswana has not done that well in managing some of the inequalities as a person can see in some of the other economies which a person can compare with. However, that also creates opportunities. So from our perspective, in the first instance, we were able to provide financial services to people that participated in the growth side. And at this point in time, we believe there's a good opportunity of also widening our products on a more developmental basis to deal with some of these equality issues.
Yeah, and that's certainly very interesting, where we're looking at a medium-sized country with a population of just over, 2 million people. With one of the smaller populations in Africa, one would assume that it boasts limited scope and potential. So, just a myth.
Yes, there is. I mean, if you compare Botswana on absolute numbers of people to, let's say, Nigeria, one of our other operations, we're talking significant differences. Nigeria, let's say 160 odd million people. But that does not imply that a person cannot grow one's business profitably in countries where there's smaller populations.
Yeah. Terence, you have a special focus on the establishment of new business entities, corporate commercial law as well, property law. When it comes to setting up shop in Botswana, just how much red tape is there? Because of course that lends to the tale of ease of doing business in this country.
Yes, I think that's one of the challenges that does come up from business people and from investors is a lot of the red tape that does exist. In terms of one, at the moment, the hot topic is the issue of residence permits and work permits for skilled, for workers, for expatriate workers. It's something that is ongoing at the moment. In terms of how quickly you get companies registered and all those processes. So those are just an example of some of the challenges that are there and that are issues that the government is looking at. Right now, the government has, in terms of work permits, just as an example, work permits and residence permits, they've introduced a point system. And there's a whole review and discussion around that point system in order to try and improve the process. In terms of companies and registration of trademarks and things like that, the government has now put into place law to establish a statutory body, a parastatal that is going to deal with the registration.
And here you're referring to the Botswana Export Development and Investment Authority?
That's something separate. That's a separate issue. But that is the what you call BIDIA, what you're referring to. There's another issue around that because that has now been merged with the International Financial Services Center, which is another topic that we might get into. But in terms of, and they bid, that's called BITC. And BITC, one of the things that they are doing is that they are trying to push government to try and make the environment a bit more investor friendly, and they're quite heavily involved in this whole process of dealing with the work permits and improving the investment climate.
Craig, you've been in Botswana since 2009, and like I've highlighted, we've had these bodies being formulated, the likes of BIDIA. Now we've had Terence highlight BITC as well, and that to encourage, a one-stop investor service center to assist investors with everything they need to actually do business in the country. What note have you made of the kind of evolution we've seen when it comes to red tape and bureaucracy in the country dealing with those issues effectively?
I think, as Terence mentioned, there are the ongoing issues with regards to regulation and visas and setting up companies and so forth. But a part of the De Beer Group's philosophy is to actually work with the governments. And so when we initially set up in 2009, we spent the better part of 6 months actually sitting down, liaising, communicating our objectives, communicating what our businesses and our business practices are all about. And we therefore welcome it. And another group that recently has just been in the process of being set up is ABFA, which is a financial services body. And therefore, Botswana is not going to get it right first time, and therefore I think being part of a global organisation, or all organisations, we need to try and do our bit to ensure that the environment that they operate is going to be conducive to be able to run a successful business.
I've noted that you, Craig, have had the backing, the global backing from the De Vera Group, and that support coming through global infrastructure, for example. Just how much of a make or break is having that kind of support?
I think for me personally has been absolutely phenomenal. We have 69 offices in 45 countries, and therefore the challenges that I face in setting up offices in Africa, originally Botswana, are not new to the organisation, and therefore dealing with visas, dealing with corporate governance, accounting issues and so forth is certainly not new. So therefore having that backup, both intellectual backup together with financial backup, has been, I think, one of the major keys to our success in Botswana.
As I said, Johan, we've had Craig's organisation, of course, seeing that global backing. What were the risks of going it alone in your case?
If you mean going it alone in the sense of just going to Botswana and starting out, I think that would be very difficult. If you're not obviously from Botswana and you want to go to a country and just start an operation there, so I think to try and understand some of the things Craig were talking about, having the experience of how to open up in a country, what is the best way of dealing with the regulators, understanding what is the best way of getting to grips with the subtleties and dealing with a country. It's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, not for the faint-hearted, but you know, if the checks and balances are done and the right boxes ticked, you can actually make a success of it. To illustrate that kind of success, I mean, just how much of a contributor has earnings from that end become relative to what you rake in from your, other 11 territories you operate in?
Botswana has been very good to us, but I think in context of what I was trying to say is that fortunately for us, it was one of the first operations that Blue started, which was before my time. But I think today, based on the total regulatory environment that has been created, and there's a lot of new regulations being created in the financial services industry as well in Botswana at present, which has caused some of the smaller players to close their door. So I think understanding of what the objectives and the spirit is of what the regulators are trying to achieve is really important.
Yeah.
But we're extremely comfortable with our operations in Botswana.
Terence, I was reading through your company profile and I picked up a line. Long experience in the Botswana market has taught us that over-specialization is counterproductive. Explain what you mean there and how that lesson was learned.
Yes, I think over the years, Minchin & Kelly is one of the oldest firms. And what we had found was that in a limited economy such as Botswana, when you over-specialized, it's almost impossible to try and target one area, right, as opposed to the bigger developed economies. So we found that we had to try and, though we try and be a niche firm, we had to try and make sure that we cover a wide spectrum of areas in terms of the legal services that we can provide. As we've gone along and as the economy has grown, we have specialized more and more. So historically, we are always looking at our model to see, and I think a lot of other big firms are also looking at their model to see how you can specialize to provide the services that are required. Because Botswana, I mean, Minchin & Kelly goes as far back as 1890, but Botswana has transformed even in the last 5 to 10 years. So we are constantly looking at that, and I think the era of specialization is coming forward. So even that statement would be reviewed within the shortest possible time, because the economy has developed in leaps and bounds, and the level of legal services that are required has changed.
Well, perhaps the lesson that you have learned, a lesson for Botswana itself to learn, with such a focus on the diamond industry, the mining industry as well, and much pressure being exerted to actually get that economy to diversify. We'll be taking a closer look at the diversification of this economy straight after the break. At this point, Craig, we say goodbye to you. Thanks so much for having joined us today. Craig Featherby is Regional Manager for Africa De Vera, and we're heading into that quick commercial break. There's more on Invest Africa when we return. Stay tuned.